I am proud to introduce 3 leaders in the CE4B community to you now: Zoe Elizabeth, Nicole Steele, and Alex Mcdonough.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Barbara. I'm Alex Mcdonough. Clean Energy for Biden is made up of over 11,000 volunteers from industry, advocacy, and public service who came together to elect Joe Biden president. Since our launch on Earth Day this past April, which feels like a decade ago, CE4B members formed 40 state teams and affinity groups, raised over $3.2 million for the campaign, and held more than 100 grassroots events. Because CE4B members are passionate about clean energy policy, acting on climate and environmental justice, we organized the policy recommendation effort to capture these diverse experts' ideas and organize and curate them in a final guide that we have provided to the Biden campaign and transition team, and which will be presented over these 3 policy summits. We are also hopeful that policymakers on Capitol Hill find this collection of work helpful. 48 papers with roughly 175 recommendations are included on issue areas ranging from leveraging private capital and workforce development to climate justice and rural development. I'm grateful to all of you who have contributed so much time to make this effort a success and produce a beautiful and useful policy guide. And finally, as Barbara mentioned, that while CE4B facilitated the development of the recommendations in the policy guide, CE4B does not endorse or take a position on any of the recommendations. Each paper stands on its own and represents the views of its respective authors. Ideas and recommendations should be attributed to the appropriate author and not CE4B. And on that, thank you again, and I'll pass it to Zoe.
Hi, everyone. Welcome all, thanks for being here. Our goal here was not to create a comprehensive plan or a set of ranked recommendations. Instead, what we aimed to do was to leverage the depth and breadth of our membership, the over 11,000 people that range from high-level strategy, national leaders, to other folks with on-the-ground experience implementing policy. In terms of content, the recommendations are written through the lens of recovery, economic recovery, and social equity. All authors had to emphasize job creation impacts and the benefits to frontline communities. Beyond this, there were no limitations on the direction of the recommendations. In regards to process, each paper was written by at least 3 authors, reviewed by a third-party expert, then fact-checked to ensure adequate citations, and then a team of Georgetown law students spot-checked the citations in every paper to ensure that they were verifiable. Finally, all of the recommendations were compiled into a web-based matrix that can be sorted by their type and the connection to their specific elements of the Biden-Harris climate plans. The process took approximately 6 months and included over 200 volunteers. I'll pass it now to Nicole.
Thanks, Zoe. Really appreciate that. And to sort of add on to your message around equity, CE4B has made a strong and early commitment to equity, inclusion, and diversity. And the EID affinity team, in partnership with the papers team, ensured that all papers considered equity as part of the recommendations, as you've already mentioned, but also included an equity reviewer. And so a huge shout out to the EID affinity group for reviewing all 48 papers with an equity lens, which was an incredibly important part of this process. We had the themes of jobs, access, and climate justice as the review. And I will note that we do have an equity night coming up. So next week is a focus on equity. But I will say that because all of those papers have an equity lens, we will be talking about equity, inclusion, and diversity throughout all of the nights, and will be an important piece of the puzzle. But looking forward to having everyone at the equity night next week. We have a great lineup of speakers, including our own executive council members, Rose McKinney-James, Devin Hampton, and then we also have Vian Trong, Tamara O'Toole's O'Loughlin, and Harold Mitchell Jr. So it should be a good night, and we'll see you there. And now back over to Barbara.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everyone. So tonight we begin by addressing the topic of infrastructure, recognizing that the United States electricity grid and energy and transportation systems represent the biggest job creation and economic opportunity engine of the 21st century. To begin this exploration, it is my honor to introduce our two keynote speakers, Colette Honorable and Jigar Shah. Colette is a former FERC commissioner appointed by President Obama, a former chair of the Arkansas Public Service Commission, and president of NARUC. Jigar Shah is currently president and co-founder of Generate Capital, and previously was founder and CEO of Sun Edison. Colette, would you like to offer a few opening remarks, followed by Jigar, please?
Thank you so much, Barbara. And as I call you, President Tyron, Barbara is president of the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment. And let me acknowledge all of my dear colleagues in the CE4B space. It's really been an honor to be part of the Executive Council and to work with all of you. I want to acknowledge Alex, I've known for years, Nicole, Zoe, Elliot, thank you guys for pulling us together. It is indeed an exciting time in our nation tonight. We are on the cusp of taking back and regaining the very soul of our nation, as President-elect Biden has said. We are ecstatic that the Biden-Harris transition team and incoming administration will embrace the following priorities. And they made it very clear from, I believe, November 8th. These will be the leading priorities as this transition is underway. COVID-19, economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. Now, tonight we're going to focus on infrastructure, but I want to talk with you for just a few minutes about how our collective work can inform these processes, the important roles that we can play as either part of or friends of the CE4B movement, and the work that it has yet to be done. We have a lot of work to do. Yes, we can pat ourselves on the back. We've done some great things, but then we've got to suit up and get in the game because there's so much to do. We are on a mission to achieve 100% carbon neutral economy by 2050. And in order to build back better, we must recognize that policy and policy drivers will be key in how we execute and how we deliver on building back better. So tonight I want to talk with you for a few minutes about what that means in terms of infrastructure. And Nicole, I'm so pleased to hear you speak about how equity and access and diversity, equity and inclusion will play a role in our ongoing work in these summits. I want to touch on that as well. Our work here is certainly never done. First of all, I want to applaud the administration for committing to re-enter into the Paris Climate Accord. That is one of the strongest drivers that this incoming administration can take, and to really focus on uniting a nation. We're behind, and it's been most unfortunate that we ever withdrew from the Climate Accord because we had been a leader globally, on the global stage in this regard. I want to read to you a quote from incoming President Biden, and I think it very well summarizes our work tonight. Joe Biden said this on July 14, 2020. I know that climate change is the challenge that's going to define our American future, and I know meeting this challenge will be a once-in-a-century opportunity to jolt new life into our economy, strengthen our global leadership, and protect our planet for future generations. That work begins with all of us. Now, it's imperative that right after we re-enter into the Paris Climate Accord, this administration must place leaders who are experienced, who have cores of steel, who work day and night. We've got a lot of catching up to do to place these leaders in both cabinet level roles and at the independent agencies like FERC. President Tyron mentioned to you that I served there at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Now, it's critical that we have leaders who will focus on infrastructure to support this very important mission of achieving this clean energy transition, which is already underway. This focus at FERC in particular must improve transmission build out and planning processes and cost allocation. I'm going to get a little technical for you energy nerds out there. We have to revisit Order 1000. It had really important, laudable goals, but now we need to take a look at it. We need to build transmission sooner. We have to build transmission that will move the wind and solar where it is to where it needs to be. This is critical, and we haven't focused enough on it. Now, it's also important that we focus on non-wires alternatives. I'm really pleased about some of the work that's been ongoing at FERC, even preceding my tenure there, but certainly for my time under Chairman Bay's leadership, we focused a great deal on energy storage and how we begin to remove barriers to entry. We've seen this iteration of the Commission continue that work. We have so much left to do. We also have to focus on grid modernization and convene stakeholders. That includes you. So you need to make your voices heard at FERC and at state commissions all around the US about the roles that we can play to spur along grid modernization. The integration of distributed energy resources, I was pleased to see Order 2222, which spoke to the aggregation of these resources at FERC. We've got a long way to go. The point is there are a number of tools in the toolkit. We need to make sure that FERC is applying the US District Court analysis that applies to evaluating the indirect impacts of greenhouse gas emissions on energy projects. That work is critical, and that work must be done. So we need leaders who will help us to do that. On the subject of workforce and economic recovery, racial equity and climate change, let me pause here because this is a very powerful intersection where all of these roads are meeting. And Nicole, again, thank you for mentioning the role of equity. We have a job to do, and we haven't done it as well. Systemic racism is real in this nation. Inequity is real, economic inequity. And the greatest way for us to rise all boats is to focus on those areas where access is an issue. What are we doing to drive resources? That means dollars to local communities. And let me be specific, to Black and Brown communities. What is the work that we can do that is real, that is practical, that is meaningful to drive resources to those communities? We need to empower Black and Brown people to be a part of this clean energy transition as well. That is something that we can do. That is tangible and that is real. As I close my remarks, 10 minutes just isn't enough time. I want to ask us all to commit to be a part of this solution. Now, respectfully, sometimes this is where we get a little off kilter. We like to pick winners and losers among ourselves. Let's agree to embrace all of the tools that we have and that we need to get this job done. To me, this is like a huddle, and this is day one of the huddle. We are focused like never before. We have a very real opportunity, as President-elect Biden said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to align and for us to focus on the work that needs to be done. So tonight, I look forward to hearing more about infrastructure and at the intersection of economic recovery, focusing on racial equity and climate change. And I want us all to ask ourselves, what role will we play to bring about this clean energy transition? What role will we each play to inform infrastructure policy dialogues and debates? What role will we play to get legislation passed in Congress, in state legislatures? What role will we play before state commissions? Government has an important role to play. Of course, that's not unexpected coming from me. I've been a part of policy for a number of years, domestically and internationally. Let's seize on this moment and make the most of it. We have a lot of work to do. I'm excited to be carrying it out with you. And let me pause. I'm excited, as we all are, to hear from Jigger. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Colette. I'm going to keep my remarks very short because Colette gave some extraordinary remarks there, and I just wanted to highlight some of the things that she said. First of all, thank you very much for all the energy and volunteer hours and others that you participated in over the last months. We have 11,000 folks. I think, Nidhi, you told me that we crossed 12,000 folks that have volunteered for this effort, which I really appreciate. I also appreciate all the time and effort people put in to writing these policy papers. It is not easy, and everyone's got a day job, at least most of us do, and it's really, really hard to make time to put this kind of effort forward. I do want to highlight something that Colette said, though, which is that we do need to support each other. One of the things that we make a mistake in doing in our community is thinking that we actually alone, for our extraordinary idea, have the votes. And I can tell all of you that you don't have the votes. That the reason why this policy forum is in 3 sections is that each one of these ideas actually appeals to a different part of the Democratic Party and frankly, the Republican Party. And that it's important for all of us to make sure that we are as enthusiastic about our own ideas as we are about other people's ideas. And that the way that we actually make change is by making the tent bigger, which is why, as Nicole suggested, we made sure that justice was a part of this from the get-go. And so I want to make sure that as we go through these papers and go through all of this, that we realize that the enthusiasm that you feel for your own ideas and your own paper really needs to be translated to enthusiasm for all of the ideas that the collective brings forward. We are not endorsing any ideas that Clean Energy for Biden, but we are endorsing the concept that no matter how wonderful President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris are, they're never going to move fast enough or far enough for us. And it will be our efforts to encourage them, educate them, push them when needed, that's going to get things done at speed and scale. And so I really appreciate all of your time tonight. I know that all of us are busy, and I just really appreciate all the effort that people are putting forward.
Thank you so much, Colette and Jigger. We appreciate you joining us here this night, and thank you for your excellent remarks. I would now like to introduce our first panel, Modernizing Our Energy System and Grid, and most notably, the panel moderator, Elliot Roseman. Elliot has worked at the intersection of energy technology, regulation, and markets for decades, directly in the United States and 20 countries worldwide, and also through analytical evaluation in over 60 countries. Most importantly for tonight's program, Elliot was the inspiration for this Policy Summit series, proposing the concept initially and then successfully leading it to fruition. It is my pleasure to introduce Elliot Roseman, who will now outline this evening's format, beginning with his own panel. Elliot, over to you, please.
Great, thank you, Barbara, and good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever in the world you're watching this program. Barbara, you've been my close collaborator, and thank you so much for that generous and kind introduction. It's been a true pleasure for me to ride herd on this project from conception about 2 months ago through to its fruition starting tonight. In addition to Alex and Nicole and Zoe, who you heard from a few minutes ago, and of course Barbara, there have been volunteers: Marshall, Kevin, Ken, Alice, Will, Trey, Chris, Matt, John, Andrew, Annie, Sandeep, Noel, Jake, Sam, and Charlie, all volunteers. And I was just trying to keep the ship of these summits pointed in the right direction. And the reason that we wanted to make this happen, and the reason that I suspect that more than 1,200 of you registered to be here tonight, is because in the dozens of papers that will be shared over these 3 summits, there's something special. Something in which we all, I suspect, have some common goals as we build back better, as Colette and Jigger have said. We know that we have to mitigate climate change. We know that we should have a more efficient electricity transmission and distribution system. We know we should have a revolution in the way we generate and utilize energy, and in the way our transportation system works, and in the way that the federal government works with different levels of government and the private sector to make this all happen. And we see the tremendous employment and training opportunities that arise from all that, particularly for low income and middle income communities, and to promote environmental justice. And these papers point the way forward in all of those areas. And this is also a great way to keep CE4B alive and well. So the real stars of these summits are those on the panels. Due to time constraints, we'll just hear from one author for each paper. And our only purpose of these summits was to provide a platform to help turbocharge their ideas and hopefully launch them into more deep consideration in the policy debate as we enter a new administration. So if any of the ideas that you hear about in the 3 panels tonight or in subsequent summits strike a responsive chord, don't stop there. Go to cleanenergyforbiden.com/policy summit where you registered for this summer tonight. And at the bottom, you'll find a link both to the compendium for all of the papers as well as an executive summary. In a moment, we'll begin the first panel. Here's how it's going to work. As you've seen in the agenda online, there are 3 panels tonight, focused largely on the theme of infrastructure, as was mentioned. The first one, which I will moderate, called Modernizing the Energy System and Grid, will begin in a moment, and Barbara will then introduce the other 2. Each panel will have 5 or 6 panelists. If you do the math, you'll see that there's far too little time to go into detail. But due to the abundance, really, and the richness of the papers and ideas, you will be able to just receive tonight a little taste, an amuse-bouche, if you will. It gives you a sense of where these authors and these papers would like to go. But it will be a Michelin star level taste. Also, each panel this evening will begin with a 1-minute video from each panelist, 5 or 6 minutes in total, in which they share the key ideas and recommendations in their papers. We'll follow the video with a live discussion that enables the authors to go into a bit more depth, perhaps achieving the level of an appetizer, and hopefully show you why it's worth looking at their papers in more detail to get the full gastronomic experience. Given the time constraints, we won't be able to take your questions in real time. However, if you will send any questions in the Zoom Q&A box and provide an email, we'll keep your email private and ask the person to whom you address the question to get back to you. Okay, here we go. Panel number 1 on modernizing our energy systems and grid will start at the customer level, our own use of energy, which we can all relate to, and then proceed up the electricity food chain. We'll include topics relating to energy efficiency, EV charging infrastructure, energy storage, lessons from the Texas experience, a potential American supergrid, and the resilience of our power network. Quite a smorgasbord. Let me very briefly introduce the energy rock stars that I am privileged to have on the panel this evening. They are Ben Evans, an energy policy professional with more than 20 years of experience working in politics, and his day job is VP of Public Affairs at the Alliance to Save Energy. Jeff Wolf is a serial clean tech entrepreneur who founded and operated a leading national solar company and has now founded and is leading an EV charging and energy storage startup. Jason Berwin is speaking today in his personal capacity with expertise from his day job as VP of Policy at the U.S. Energy Storage Association and his prior work at the Bipartisan Policy Center and the California PUC. Caitlin Smith began her career at the ERCOT Independent Market Monitor and has since represented clean energy developer interests in ERCOT at the market, regulatory, and technology levels. Arthur Halbenstock focuses on advancing the equitable clean energy transition, bringing over 30 years of public and private experience in creating robust results from complex energy and environmental challenges. And Brian Levite, the Regulatory Affairs Director for S&C Electric, an alumni of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the author of the book, Energy Resilient Buildings and Communities. Those are the folks that you will hear from after their 1-minute videos, which I'm going to ask Charlie to cue up right now.
Hey, everybody. Ben Evans here, and I am excited to be talking with you today about the role that energy efficiency can play, not only in helping us rebuild the economy and create jobs, but also in tackling the climate crisis. People forget that energy efficiency is by far the largest employer in the clean energy sector with more than 2 million jobs, most of them in construction and manufacturing. And it's also the single most effective solution we have for climate change. And the IEA predicts that energy efficiency alone could account for nearly half of the carbon emissions needed to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. The beauty of energy efficiency is it does all of that while reducing costs for businesses and manufacturers to make them more productive and competitive, and reducing costs for households. And that's particularly important for lower income households who spend an outsized share of their income on energy bills. So there's so much more that we can be doing to advance efficiency, expanding tax incentives and investments in public building retrofits and weatherizing homes. And I look forward to talking to you about that more today. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Wolf. By combining the three problems of electric vehicle charging station deployment, the need for increased utility grid resiliency, and increased penetration of distributed energy, we can help solve them all. Because of their large power draws, the installation of EV charging systems creates very large stresses on the utility grid. This makes finding sites for charging stations difficult and expensive, and it can take over a year to get the utility connected. Locating battery energy storage at EV charging stations can significantly reduce grid stress while also reducing the cost and time for EV charging station installation, accelerating deployment. Batteries at charging stations also provide resilient charging necessary for evacuations and for first responders. Batteries at charging stations increase overall grid resilience and make it easier to integrate grid edge renewables. By combining stationary storage and bidirectional EV charging, affordable resilience hubs can be created. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jason Berwin. Energy storage is critical on the path to a clean energy economy. And so a number of actions under both existing authorities and new legislation can drive storage to sustain higher shares of renewables, electrify the economy, and drive resilience to climate disruptions. First, establish market designs that value and compensate flexibility through FERC rulemakings and qualifying facility eligibility. Second, promote a domestic storage supply chain and innovation, creating demand-driven growth with investment tax credits for storage, credits and grants for manufacturing facilities of storage, and reorienting DOE investments to demonstrations. Third, promote equitable electric system resilience with storage, targeting federal grants for resilience investments, particularly in low-income communities. And fourth, support equity and environmental justice in storage deployments, establishing storage and hybrids as the best available control technology, and creating a framework to transition fossil units, especially in environmental justice communities. Thank you.
I'm Caitlin Smith. In order to fully utilize the abundant clean energy resources that we have in the United States, we need to develop a bold transmission plan to access those. Clean energy resources tend to be in rural areas away from load centers. This means they're often lacking adequate transmission to get them to load. And often these areas are the same ones that would benefit job-wise and economically from having transmission projects built to them. In Texas, we have the Competitive Renewable Energy Zone, or CREZ lines. These lines were exactly developed to take clean energy resources from rural areas to load centers. These lines initially found success in relieving congestion, getting the clean energy more to load, and improving the overall grid reliability and price signaling. For a national plan, we would want to model after the success of that design, but to find a federal source of funding instead of ratepayer funding. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Hi, I'm Arthur Habenstock, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk about the paper Rob Gramlich, Alex Mcdonough, and I contributed on an American supergrid and super distribution systems. Like so much of our nation's infrastructure, our electric transmission and distribution systems are antiquated and in disrepair. They were never designed to meet the needs of a clean, renewables-based energy system. To unlock our incredible clean energy potential, we need the electric equivalent of the national superhighway system that led to the economic prosperity of the 1950s and 1960s. That can unleash large quantities of low-cost, reliable, and dependable clean power. We also need smart electric distribution systems that can leverage customer investments in clean power technologies to create greater local reliability and resilience and to further lower costs. We recommend several specific actions that can make supergrids and super distribution systems a reality in the near term. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and thanks again for the opportunity.
The U.S. needs a resilient energy system that can quickly respond to and recover from major events to keep the power flowing to American homes and businesses. Our proposal focuses on 4 critical areas: creating a smarter grid that will improve resilience while supporting our goals of increased reliability and reduced carbon emissions, a robust national effort to get ahead of increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks that utilities face daily, microgrids that can provide power where it's needed most when the grid goes down, and efficient, responsive buildings that will help us do more with less energy. Our paper proposes a grant program that would fund transformational investments in all 4 areas, a data hub that would foster a better understanding of energy threats, responses, and best practices, and finally, a presidential award to raise awareness and encourage ambitious action. These investments would create jobs, protect first responders and at-risk communities, all while supporting our economic recovery and national security.
Great, thank you all for those awesome videos. Let's talk about this now. Starting with Ben. Ben, your paper, as you said, focused on energy efficiency, but let's be real. Energy efficiency is not always what we think of first when we think about the cutting edge of energy. We think of solar and wind and storage and hydrogen, high tech, and a plethora of other things. People think they know, I think, about insulation and light bulbs and the like, but you and your co-authors have made an extremely strong case for energy efficiency first, and that we're really at a unique nexus today. So tell us more about why you think we are at that juncture, and more about how you think the new administration or government at all levels should realize the continuing and expanded tremendous potential for energy efficiency.
Great, yeah, thank you, Elliot, and thanks to you and Barbara, and really the whole crew at CE4B for putting this on, and a particular thanks to all the co-authors on this paper who contributed a ton of hard work. Very much appreciate that. And to your point, Elliot, we were pleasantly surprised and really excited at how much the Biden campaign focused on energy efficiency throughout the campaign. If you watch the presidential debates, you know that building retrofits even made it into the conversation in both of the presidential debates, albeit in a little bit of a muddled way. But I think, you know, we really sort of felt like we had arrived from that. And then I think it really reflects a recognition from the Biden campaign and from others of the role that efficiency can play right now in addressing the challenges, the unique challenges that we face at this moment. And that's, you know, digging out of this economic hole and creating jobs, addressing the climate crisis and reducing carbons, and also addressing equity and accessibility. And I think we feel like efficiency can do so much to address all 3 of those pillars. And really the paper, we tried to align with the proposals with the Biden campaign proposals, and also with those 3 pillars. So, you know, jobs, we know that energy efficiency is the largest clean energy employer. The efficiency economy has lost more than 300,000 jobs as a result of COVID just since March. We think that you know, we can bring those jobs back with a targeted stimulus that does things, you know, invests in retrofitting public buildings, our hospitals, our schools, our convention centers, our airports. We can expand tax incentives. If you've applied for a tax incentive for improving the efficiency of your home recently, you know that those tax incentives are woefully outdated. And expanding those, we can create hundreds of thousands of jobs. And so I think, you know, on climate, we know buildings account for about 40% of our energy consumption and almost as much of our carbon emissions. We have to tackle existing buildings and retrofitting existing buildings. And finally, on equity and affordability, obviously this is an issue that we're all looking at with a new light this year. And we feel like efficiency has a really strong role to play there. There are too many families and households that are spending too much of their incomes on energy, 10, 15, 20% on their energy bills, whereas the upper middle classes are spending 2 or 3%. And energy efficiency can do a lot with that by, you know, we need strong standards for appliances and equipment. We need modern building energy codes, and we need programs like weatherization assistance that can invest in making those improvements and helping people with their efficiency.
Great, and also for those who, as Colette said, are more on the geeky side, energy efficiency has a benefit for the distribution grid as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're excited about energy efficiency, not just at the component level, but at the systems level, where it can, it can help create a grid that is more flexible and more responsive, and it can work alongside storage and the other folks we're going to hear from tonight to create a more flexible grid and to help us, better manage the demand that we have and reduce the overall demand that we have.
Great. And now with Order 2222 from FERC, demand response and energy efficiency will be able to participate in wholesale markets in organized areas as well. Let me shift gears to Jeff. Let me use that. Jeff, let's build upon what Ben just talked about regarding the distribution grid. Your paper addressed the idea of putting batteries on the grid, specifically at sites for electric vehicle charging stations. Talk more about how that could help with the low utilization of the grid, with de-stressing and other benefits. Why is this such a compelling idea?
Well, thanks for the question, Elliot, and glad to be here as well. The utility grid today is only used about 50% of its capacity most of the time. It's only a few hours a year when the grid gets stressed and has to be helped along. And so we end up replacing utility grid that is very serviceable if only we could put some storage on it. So by putting energy storage at the edge of the grid, we can actually expand the functionality of the grid and use that existing asset better. And we can deploy energy storage at the grid much faster than we can rebuild the grid as well. So not only do we get to have the benefits of reusing existing asset, which is always more cost effective, and then deploying energy storage, which is less expensive and faster than rebuilding the grid. By deploying energy storage at the edge of the grid, you also get added benefits. It's like the Ginzu knife. It keeps on giving more and more and more. So you have the storage there for the EV charger, mitigates the load of that. You can also now deploy more distributed energy resources because you've got more hosting capacity on that distribution grid. And then you also get resilience because you've got energy storage at the edge of the grid, and it's easy to segment the grid into what can effectively become microgrids. So by taking a different approach to rebuilding our grid with energy storage at the edge, now we can create an edge in grid rather than a centralized out grid. We can do it faster, we can save money, and we can build a more resilient both to weather and climate disasters as well as to cyber attack. All for less money, faster and easier, now that the storage technology has come so far.
And who would pay for this? Yeah. This would be, I think you mentioned through ITC, through an investment tax credits?
Yeah. So the variety of methods. One is we provide economic benefits. So economic benefit helps to pay for this. It becomes a less expensive way to do something you're doing already. So there's economic benefit there. But then investment tax credit, which you mentioned, that applies right now to storage that's coupled with solar or coupled with wind. We want that investment tax credit to apply to storage as standalone, be it however it's charged.
Great,
that investment tax credit would really help to provide the extra kick that the storage needs to make economic sense in most cases.
And last,
sorry,
Jeff, go ahead, finish up. Sorry.
Couple that with some workforce development, some government-sponsored workforce development to help retrain folks from, say, oil and gas industries or other industries from disadvantaged communities into energy storage, battery energy storage, both manufacturing, US-based manufacturing, and deployment. This will create many, many small jobs in many areas because grid edge is everywhere. So everybody's got a job near them if we do a grid edge strategy.
Great. Thanks for making that tie into training and to low-income communities. That was the last question I was going to ask you, but you made that connection. Jason, your paper and those of your co-authors spoke about storage, obviously. And it seems to me that storage really bridges several worlds. You know, it goes from retail to wholesale, from variable resources like wind and solar to base load, and from one time frame to another as well. So talk to us about why storage at this time is so vital, both on the high voltage and the low voltage grids.
Absolutely, Elliot. Thank you for the question. You know, I think it's really exciting that Jeff has done half the work of talking about this already. I think we'll find this in the CE4B community. Our ideas are all so interlinked in so many ways. You know, storage is the flexibility that our grid needs in the 21st century. It is key to higher shares of renewable energy on both the bulk system and on the distribution system.
and to be able to integrate those higher shares without relying on fossil fuel. Really, this is the best substitute we have in a zero carbon future for things like gas-fired power plants. It, of course, as Jeff has now talked about at length, better enables electrification of other sectors, particularly transportation, and buffering the fast charging demands on the grid, and enhancing local grid infrastructure is a key value proposition for storage. The resilience benefits of that follow as well. And I think it's one of the few technologies that is a part of both mitigation and adaptation, particularly important for frontline communities, and reducing reliance on fuel supply chains. But also just remember, this is an affordability issue as well. We have excess capacity in power plants and wires. This is a much higher utilization asset. You get a lot more value out of storage because you don't need to idle it. You're not burning fuel when you use it. And that is really at the heart of why there's so much value to get out of storage. And as a new economic sector for the US, of course, new jobs, it's a driver of economic innovation in terms of having cross-sectoral benefits, whether it's in electrochemistry advances or other storage technologies, and a chance for us to reassert global leadership in energy technologies.
So let me be devil's advocate for a second. Why do we need a strong government role here? There's already a lot of storage companies out there. Arguably, storage is in the private sector. Are we at a point where we need a compelling and strong role for government? What really can government do to accelerate this transition?
Sure. Well, the first thing to remember is that the rules and the economics of the grid were not designed with widespread available storage in mind. So we need to update regulations, market designs, so many different rules of the game to ensure that you can value and compensate the flexibility and versatility that energy storage can provide to the grid. And that's really been a key part of what's been happening, for example, as Colette noted at FERC. But also there's a real importance here in accelerating deployments. If you're going to build back better, you need to do it with storage now, because every power plant investment is a multi-decadal decision. It locks in fuels, it locks in pipelines. And so storage, including with renewables, can compete now in replacing retiring capacity and meeting new demands on the grid. But we need to accelerate that to make sure that we are getting these assets on the grid today, not just for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also the local air pollution issues that have affected so many communities, particularly environmental justice communities, for years, by removing assets that are putting out NOx and SOx and particulate matter with non-emitting resources like storage. In addition, and as Jeff mentioned, distributed multiple use storage that's going between local needs and the system needs can involve communities historically not benefiting from energy transition to actually contribute to this larger economic transformation. And that is a great jobs opportunity and investment opportunity up and down the whole value chain. And it includes the building trades as well, which I think is really powerful for this kind of a sector.
So just take one more minute, Jason, and talk about the market and market design and tariff reform things, elements that you alluded to. What's needed there?
Warming my geek heart. You know, market designs for flexibility are going to be absolutely critical. And it's one of the reasons why my co-authors and I were so focused on things that sound pretty arcane, like FERC rulemakings, to make sure that we're updating how capacity accreditation works. That's a very wonky term for saying, what's going to back up the system? Is it going to be fuel-based power plants, or is it going to be storage and demand response, right? Rules about what kind of market services you get paid for and what kinds of technologies can compete to provide them. But in addition, the hybridization of things like storage plus renewables does not have a clear regulatory framework right now at FERC. And so that's going to be, I think, extraordinarily important for the next FERC, is much like Order 841, removed barriers to and normalize the participation of storage and electricity markets. We need to do the same thing for hybrid storage plus renewables resources.
Super. Thanks, Jason. Let's move now to more at the wholesale level. Jason was kind of a bridge between retail and wholesale. And let me ask you, Caitlin, based on the CREZ experience in Texas, your paper described the lessons that come out of building those resources. Build it and renewables will come. And your paper talked about interconnecting the three different grids, major grids in the country. Give us more color on why that's a good idea and how you'd go about getting that done. This is kind of be revolutionary, but how do we actually make that happen?
Sure. And so I want to steal the phrase that I'm speaking in my personal capacity, and I also want to thank the co-authors. I hope everyone checks that paper out. Everybody put a lot of work into it. And apologize for sticking my tongue out if anyone saw that. I live in a house with a lot of windows that could use some of Ben's energy efficiency, and my dog is making me very nervous. So our recommendation was to release the NREL STEAM study. That was a study that demonstrated that the 3 currently isolated grids in Texas, the East, the West, and ERCOT, if those were connected, the study basically said that that connection and that transmission plan would pay for itself. So we recommend releasing that and then connecting the grids serving the East and the West. We'd want to include Texas, investment in Texas in our recommendation, but maintaining that ERCOT independence from FERC is something we want to do. That independence really allows for faster innovation and flexibility. My expertise is from ERCOT, and I think one of the reasons for the success of CREZ is, after it was built, ERCOT kind of let the market work, let price signal new investment. So the transmission did its job, and then the generation could do its job. I think to the second part of your question, I'm not going to give regulators exact instruction on what to do, but I think releasing that study and using the example Texas set, they both play to the idea that regulators should continue to identify opportunities for innovation and evaluating a transmission plan. Our main idea was to get clean energy, which is usually located away from load. We want to get that to load. We need a clear path when there are bottlenecks or congestion, and getting that generation to load. And I think as technology changes, we need to continue evaluating things. Use of existing right-of-ways from railways was something we recommended. So maybe railways that used to go to coal plants, those right-of-ways can now be used for transmission to go to clean energy. New technology in generation, in energy storage, as Jason spoke about, in high voltage transmission lines that I think Arthur is going to speak about. And I know Arthur will speak more about funding, but things like ITC for transmission or storage, I think are really good areas where it's important that regulators continue to identify the opportunities for new innovation in transmission.
Excellent. You did address partly the question I was going to follow up with, which is the biggest bugaboo about getting transmission done, which you will recognize, which is siting.
Yes.
So talk just for another minute about that. You mentioned railway corridors. How do you actually get these transmission lines?
Yeah, so I think I will leave the funding conversation for Arthur, but the siting, it's really important to get the load, as I said. It's usually located away from, or the generation for clean energy is usually located away from load. So in siting the transmission, I think we need to be deliberate in what we're getting to where. As I said, if you don't have a path like the roadways, I think the example's already been used, from generation to load, there's bottlenecks, there's no way to get it. It's the same thing with electricity, you create congestion. So I think we need to be conscious of the siting. And we do recommend using existing right-of-ways. I just think, transmission, one of the issues is it does take longer to site and permit and get built in generation, so you can't always keep up. But I think using the existing right-of-ways from railroads or anything else kind of cuts on some of that time and money.
Super. Thanks, Caitlin. And let me turn to you, Arthur. Your paper and Caitlin's have some synergies, indeed. And you and your co-authors addressed both the super grid at the wholesale level, as well as at the super distribution system. So I thought you might come with a big S, on your on the front of your jacket there, but
it's underneath.
But seriously, what's wrong with the grid we have? I mean, why is this an opportunity, or why are we missing an opportunity here and do we have the authority to build these lines at present?
Well, Commissioner Honorable said it quite well. We are way behind in getting solar and wind and geothermal and biopower and all the clean energy resources from where they're generated to where they're needed. That's true on the bulk power system, the network system. It's also true in the distribution system. Our system was never designed to take power from all these different sources and to share it around. It was intended for large central station to deliver to the network and then down to the distribution system and to welcoming customers. Now customers are generating power. They're committing to demand response and being part of this greater ecosystem. But our system's old, it's antiquated. We know that not all the wildfires that we've had out west are caused by the problems that we've had with the system and not being able to keep that system up, but some of them have. And that's caused some bankruptcy issues and other issues, other reliability problems. It's time for a whole new way of thinking about things. We are also recognizing that all of these different elements of the clean energy system are necessary to support each other. We've seen some reliability problems out west again with the blackouts in August. Some of that was caused by the lack of ability of moving that power around, of taking the best resources and having them support each other. So what we see is that with a super distribution system and super network, super grid, we can move power from where it's needed to from where it's generated, and ensure that when one area is short, the other areas can be made whole. There is existing authorities. So the Energy Policy Act of 2005 was really prescient and in many ways before its time. It included two sections, Section 368, the Energy Right-of-Way Authority, and Section 1221, the National Interest Electric Transmission Corridors, which includes backstop siting authority. When those were first implemented, they weren't all that well received. That was well before we had the kind of renewable energy we have in the system now. It was before we realized just how interdependent these states are on each other. And so the opportunity to share the costs, to ensure that we can all work together, that we're all experiencing that reduced cost of energy, reduced prices of energy by tapping into the lowest cost resources, wherever those might be, it's going to make for a more reliable, lower cost, cleaner energy system for everybody into the future.
And you're proposing to create a new entity as well, right? A Supergrid Power Marketing Association that really would have a laser focus on this.
Well, the power marketing administrations have done a really good job in their area. Bonneville Power Administration, for example, and WAPA. We think that a power marketing administration that was focused on the supergrid can help build those elements out and get them built as soon as 2025. It doesn't take that long, as you were alluding to earlier, to actually build transmission. It takes a very long time to site it and permit it. And that kind of federal authority can really bridge the gap. We also see a similar need on the distribution side. And distribution utilities do a really good job, but this is complicated, figuring out how to make it bi-directional, multi-directional when it used to just deliver one way. There's a lot of R&D that's needed, and some tax credits can help too. We see huge opportunities for customers to be able to participate in a way that is going to make the system that much better for everybody.
Super. I won't ask you to comment because we're running short on time, but there are also tremendous job creation potential, particularly with the build out of the distribution grid that you're talking about. So thanks.
For equity communities in particular.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brian, I turn to you last in this panel, since in many ways I think your paper and your co-authors on grid resilience deals with the entire energy system and our economic well-being. In fact, we've already acknowledged that there's a need for resilience. Several of the other speakers have talked about that. And ever since the Energy Policy Act of 2005 that Arthur just mentioned, we've had in place a program and a set of focus on resilience issues. So why is now the time to double down on the resilience area? And what are the best ways to go about that?
All right, well, I mean, in terms of right now, the short glib answer is we need to protect our economic recovery. I mean, we can look at the increasing threats. We have increasing extreme weather threats. We have increasing cyber attacks. We have a grid that is aging and not being replenished and renewed and updated fast enough. But at the same time, we also have an increased reliance, both personally and economically, on energy to accomplish what we need to do day to day. That is more acute now, that we need to rebuild and bring back the recovery. The National Academy of Sciences has shown with data that the economic cost of major outages is increasing. So we need to think about that, and how do we protect that? We protect that with resilience. In terms of also now, look at where we've come. I mean, I don't have to sing the hits because my colleagues already did, talking about the things that enable resilience, smart grid controls and switching equipment, big data analytics, energy storage, microgrids. If you look at where all those things were 15 years ago and where they are now, dramatic drops in cost curve, dramatic increases in capabilities. And everybody sort of mentioned resilience, or a lot of folks mentioned resilience, but the key thing about resilience is it's got to be done intentionally. You can't put all these great things in place and resilience will just appear. It has to be done with resilience in mind. Even if you've got energy storage at the grid edge, if it's not prepared to act in an energy resilience role, in addition to all the other great use cases you can deploy it with, you don't get that benefit. So it has to be done intentionally. In terms of the best way to do it, it's really about identifying the pain points in the market, some of the hurdles that we can overcome, whether they be regulatory, and there are regulatory hurdles. There are ways we can jumpstart the industry. We did it with the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. We jumpstarted aspects of the industry quite successfully. We can do the same for energy resilience.
And would you say that, where would you say the sort of the priorities are? Or is it really all of the above? I mean, you've mentioned cyber, you've mentioned wildfires. There's a lot of different risks. Where are the needs the most critical, and how should we pay for them?
Well, resilience is definitely not a one-size-fits-all thing. We have different resilience challenges in different places. So we can think about, our resilience challenges in Florida are going to be different than they are in California, and be different than they are in Illinois. We need to focus on our pain points. Where do we really need it? We need hospitals, military bases, community centers, first responders. These folks have to be up when the grid is down. But also think about vulnerable communities. Think about folks who don't have the option to hop in a car and run to a hotel when the grid is down. Folks who need refrigerated medicines for, past when the grid would come back. Areas where a grocery store failing could create a food desert. In terms of how to pay for it, there definitely is federal funding that I think can jumpstart the industry, but there's a lot that can be done in a very cost-effective way, particularly because we've heard resilience talked about across topics. A lot of the resilient solutions are cost-effective because they're cost-effective. Renewable energy is cost-effective. Energy storage with the right use cases is cost-effective. These are things that can be done at the grid level, at the local level, at the national level. And as long as we incorporate resilience into our planning, they can make a lot of sense without a lot of cost.
Right. Thank you. And if you think about it, it's really an insurance policy that we're buying to prevent future damage that would be much greater if we didn't pay the premium for the insurance. Thank you all. I can't thank our panelists and CE4B enough for providing this opportunity to share ideas on these 6 papers for modernizing our energy system and the grid. And with that, I'll turn it back to Barbara.
Thank you, Elliot. That was a terrific discussion, very thoughtful, and appreciate everybody's participation. We now turn to the second panel in tonight's infrastructure session, Mobilizing Public and Private Investment, featuring moderator Bracken Hendricks. Bracken is CEO and founder of Urban Ingenuity, one of the nation's leading commercial PACE financing programs, and he's a former senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Bracken, I turn it over to you and your panel, please.
Thanks, Barbara. So this is an exciting topic specifically for today. Mobilizing public and private capital is the vehicle that's going to actually transform the economy. It's really what's mobilized clean energy for Biden. These are folks who are actually deploying resources into assets and getting things built. This panel is going to dig into how the Biden administration's proposals and specific topics can lead to raising standards, driving new investment, driving the sort of capital investment into economic justice and recovery, and the role of private capital in particular, given the economic downturn, given some of the challenges in the makeup of Congress right now is more pressing than ever. So I'm really interested to hear these folks' thoughts. It's a very distinguished panel. We're going to hear from Dan Kamen, who is Professor of Energy, Nuclear Engineering, and Public Policy at UC Berkeley, focusing on decarbonizing the grid and energy access, as well as energy justice. He's worked with the State Department, the World Bank, and IPCC lead author. We also have Veronique Bugnon, who is a climate scientist, an entrepreneur, and academic. She teaches climate finance and risk at Johns Hopkins and runs Clearly Energy, which provides energy modeling solutions, real estate and finance industries, and has a PhD in climate physics and chemistry from MIT. In addition, Dan Riker is an investor and educator who served as DOE's Assistant Secretary and Chief of Staff. He's been Google's Director of Climate and Energy Initiatives, president of the first All Renewables Project Fund, and the founding director of a Stanford Center on Energy Policy, and a partner in a new climate infrastructure fund. In addition, Pearson Stokeline has served as a legal, regulatory, and policy counsel at FERC, and subsequently to companies throughout the energy sector. While acting in his personal capacity today, he's head of the Policy and Regulatory Council at Mindspring Energy. And last but certainly not least is Vanessa Tutos, who is Director of Government Affairs at EDP Renewables in Houston. And she's responsible for legislative and regulatory policy initiatives that impact the wind and solar industries, focused on ERCOT, SPP, MISO, the Southeastern markets. And also very importantly of note, she led the Texas chapter of the Clean Energy for Biden in 2020. So thank you for your work and for the incredible work that was done in the state of Texas. So you'll see this is an august panel. And Charlie, let me turn it over to you to run the video.
I'm Dan Cameron. The offshore wind industry is mature and the largest untapped source of clean energy. With a path to 80,000 jobs by 2025, that would play a pivotal role in our 2035 clean energy target. The industry has the potential for 200,000 megawatts by 2050. Day one, the president of energy. With a path to 80,000 jobs by 2025, that would play a pivotal role in our 2035 clean energy target. The industry has the potential for over 200,000 megawatts by 2050. Day one, the president could issue an executive order permitting 5,000 megawatts by 2025, 30,000 megawatts by 2030. That would be enough to power 11 million homes. There would be an immediate return of $2 billion in leases to the federal government and $17 billion injected to the economy by 2025. The new Secretary of the Interior could issue an order coordinating activities across government agencies, coordinating the process of environmental review and citing approval, and of construction and operation permits. There would be immediate benefits to frontline communities in terms of jobs and air quality, as well as engagement with EPA, NOAA, and fisheries agencies.
Hi, I'm Pearson Stokeline. For more than a decade, federal tax incentives have been a primary driver for the deployment of clean energy technologies, including wind and solar, which now represent nearly 10% of U.S. electric power generation. Many existing clean energy tax credits are set to expire or phase down substantially by the end of 2021, however. And with the economy already weakened by the COVID crisis, last-minute extension or premature expiration will result in significant manufacturer and developer job losses, investor uncertainty, and threaten critical clean energy objectives. Rather than perpetuating the existing patchwork approach to energy tax policy, which unnecessarily picks winners and losers and stifles innovation, the Biden administration should work with Congress to create a single, technology-neutral, carbon performance-based clean energy investment credit, or CEIC. As envisioned, the CEIC would be made accessible to early-stage companies and technologies via direct pay, refundability, and/or transferability. These same tools could be used without congressional action when tax equity markets contract, and the CEIC would provide incentive adders to projects that serve disadvantaged communities, are comprised of first-of-a-kind or emerging technology, directly replace existing fossil generation capacity, meet certain wage and labor standards, or satisfy minimum domestic content requirements. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dan Riker on a Federal Clean Energy Deployment Administration, or CEDA. There are two steps we are proposing to accelerate investment in U.S. energy projects deploying clean energy technologies. First, the Biden-Harris administration should reactivate the 4 existing DOE loan programs in clean energy, advanced vehicles, transmission lines, and tribal projects, with $46 billion in current loan authority. The Trump administration made only 1 loan under this program, while the Obama administration made tens of billions of dollars of successful investments. Second, Congress should create CETA to leverage significant private investment in clean energy projects by first, incorporating the reactivated DOE loan programs, second, developing additional financial tools, and third, creating a $10 billion revolving fund. CETA was actually adopted 51-6 in the House Energy and Commerce Committee in 2009 and was reintroduced in 2020 in a larger federal clean energy standards bill by Representatives DeGette, Huffman, and Peters. CETA is preferable to a national climate or green bank. Unlike CETA, a nonprofit green bank would lack access to low-cost and unlimited U.S. Treasury lending, and therefore require regular new congressional appropriations, as well as being subject to oversight by the Comptroller of the Currency. We should seek congressional enactment of CETA in the first year of the Biden administration. Thanks very much.
I'm Vanessa Tutos. To decarbonize the economy, we must recognize the importance of markets and competition, not as an alternative to policy, but as an efficient means of allocating resources and risk. Competition can provide opportunities for clean energy deployment, as well as system-wide efficiency, smart building, and smart grid technologies through new ideas and expeditious execution. Further, much of the country will not readily accept top-down regulation. Including markets and competition in plans to expand clean energy will facilitate opportunities in conservative and battleground states. As such, we recommend first, replicate where possible the Texas energy-only market, which reliably delivers low-cost renewables with state-of-the-art forecasting and a 5-minute dispatch process. Second, provide easy market access and standard platforms to promote innovative third-party customer services and decarbonization solutions. Third, allow electric utilities to focus on building and managing the grid, while the private sector takes on the investment and risk obligations of deploying generation. Finally, standardize transmission rates to promote competition, remove market entry barriers, and provide lower electricity prices to consumers. Thank you.
This is Veronique with policies to support cities' climate goals. Cities have been pushing the climate policy envelope, but they've also been particularly affected by the COVID pandemic. First off, buildings need to be electrified and decarbonized. That means support for cities building performance standards, and the federal government can actually lead by example by setting efficiency targets for its own buildings. New buildings should be net zero energy, and we need a massive scale up of building retrofits, in particular in underserved communities. Second is transportation. People in cities are into biking now, which is great. The federal government should facilitate and fund bike lanes and bike parkings. School buses and urban fleets of vehicles need to be electrified. Third is the creation of innovation hubs. Change needs to happen fast, but we can target investment at the cities most exposed to technology disruptions. Finally, many cities have acute climate risk from flooding and sea level rise, and increasing resilience spending and mandating actual climate risk disclosure is smart investment.
There we go. Now can you hear me? Wonderful videos, and let's jump into the conversation. Dan Kamen, let me turn to you first. I think you made a pretty compelling case that offshore wind can drive a huge amount of jobs and investment, sorely needed right now in both for climate reasons and for economic recovery. But we also know that wind has been slow, offshore wind has been slow to site and to permit and to grow. So what is it that's going to unlock capital investment during a Biden administration?
Well, it's a great question because we have seen the takeoff of offshore wind in Europe, and we've seen takeoff in China, more than 30 gigawatts already installed there, 6 gigawatts going up last year alone at prices only 20% higher than onshore, with far easier transmission connections to many of our biggest load centers or population centers. And ironically, the Trump administration is really handing this as a victory to the Biden team, because there are so many projects that are ready to go. There's a number that have had all of their permitting done. They're literally waiting for the next stages. And so this is kind of a classic policy win in that it's ready to go. The companies could get things in the water in the next literally few weeks. And that means there could be first power from these by Q2 2021. And
with the job numbers I mentioned, up to 80,000 jobs by the end of 2025. Huge opportunities to partner with communities that are on the front lines, both providing jobs to underserved areas, but also building a whole series of novel partnerships with communities to do revenue sharing, first jobs, job training. There's really a thick agenda and a playbook here. And when we look at the opportunities, it kind of dwarfs many other things we're talking about. California alone, we're looking at potentially 10 gigawatts over the decade. That's a quarter of our peak demand for one state alone. So you start to talk about numbers that bring in essentially a brand new sector. And one of the key features is that in all the discussion about intermittency of solar and wind, we've had our challenges here in California as an example. What you get is a large technology where the prime power generation is often out of sync with the times of peak wind and solar. So it gives you this whole mix. And it's for those reasons that the financial capital is there. And it goes even a step further. And that is, you can think about offshore wind for electricity, but also for hydrogen production. And so in terms of linking in a whole number of aspects of the clean energy economy to meet some of the heavy rail, trucking, and other opportunities, it's got opportunities for business sectors and a whole variety of our most challenging parts of the equation. Again, because it's such a natural fit with the environmental justice mandate to really build out and support frontline communities, it's got investments for essentially all actors, right, ready to go.
With the vice president, the president-elect has spoken so eloquently about union jobs. It's clearly industrial scale production, very, very large manufactured infrastructure and installation. So clearly a huge driver of capital investment. Let me turn now to you, Veronique. In your video, you talked about a whole range of investments in cities, and specifically a range of policies that are causing new investment, from things like building energy performance standards to risk disclosure and resilience to innovation hubs. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more from you about what you think is working exceptionally well and what's really driving impact in communities and in buildings.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, so this, the cities paper is a little bit different from most of the other things we've heard tonight, because it's by design is very broad. And I obviously could not have done it without my co-authors. It overlaps with a number of things that have been mentioned or will be mentioned, like retrofit programs or, installing EV infrastructure. So I'm not really going to repeat that, but I think we wanted to highlight sort of three main things. One is, cities have really been kind of centers of policy innovation for the past 4 years, and they deserve a seat at the federal table. The federal government probably has a few things to learn from the leadership of cities in the design of building energy performance standards. They should be, pushed and replicated as much as possible as a way to sort of drive down commercial building emissions across the country. And the federal government should adopt one of its own for its own buildings. The second key point is sort of the need for infrastructure, which kind of reinforces kind of the Build Back Better theme of tonight. Cities are in a world of hurt, but there's also tremendous opportunities for investment and leveraging all the financial mechanisms, which we're going to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so, whether it's commercial PACE, whether it's energy performance contracting, whether it's green mortgages and make green mortgages actually work. And all kinds of things. The Clean Energy Deployment Administration, I'm going to plug the next speaker. All of that sort of needs to grow to decarbonize cities and buildings. And the final point really is innovation hubs, right? And workforce training, because that goes hand in hand with it, is that we can't leave people in cities behind. And there was actually an article or an announcement today, I think, by the mayor of Pittsburgh and a bunch of other sort of Midwestern cities mayors expressing their concern. And I think what we wrote kind of went to that theme, that yes, we need a rapid energy transition. There's no way around that, but we shouldn't leave people or cities behind. And it's part of the role of the federal government to sort of, put its funding to sort of help promote innovation hubs and this transformation.
Thanks very much. You know, that's such a huge issue. The importance of a federal role, the importance of a national program to actually build at the scale of the entire country and respond to these macro problems that affect the country or the planet. A lovely segue to you, Dan Riker. You talked very eloquently about CETA and clean energy deployment finance. You mentioned specifically that a CETA structure would have benefits in terms of scoring, in terms of access to treasury capital, possibly having regulatory benefits. And I'd love it to understand a little bit more clearly what structurally about this Clean Energy Deployment Authority is beneficial and attractive to you.
Well, thanks, Bracken, and thanks, Veronique. First, let me stress, as I said in the video, CETA enjoyed very strong bipartisan support in 2009 when it was adopted 51-6, House Energy and Commerce Committee. It also, I should point out, had strong and bipartisan support in the Senate Energy Committee, including from then Democratic Chair Bingaman and the current Republican Chair Murkowski. With mixed results of the recent election, bipartisan congressional proposals are particularly important these days. CETA is also back in the mix again as the first section of a new clean energy standard bill introduced this past summer by members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. CETA is going to help drive down the cost of deploying clean energy projects and thereby drive down the cost of achieving a major Biden administration goal, which is a national clean electricity standard to get us to a 100% clean electric grid by 2035. CETA, structurally, unlike some other climate and green bank proposals, would have full access to the unlimited and low-cost lending authority of the federal treasury, thereby not requiring a return to Congress for more funding. It would have enough to get going and make money in the process and keep investing. Finally, CETA would directly incorporate, as I said, the $46 billion with a B, in existing loan-making authority in the 4 current DOE loan programs. First, the Title 17 program with about $24 billion in authority for energy projects. That program, for example, backed the first 5 solar projects in the US larger than 100 megawatts under President Obama. CETA, second, would incorporate the ATVM program, which has about $18 billion in authority to support advanced vehicle manufacturing. The Obama DOE made Elon Musk a $465 million loan under the ATVM program to buy a shutdown auto factory in Silicon Valley to get Tesla going. Musk paid the loan back 10 years early with interest, and the rest, I guess, is history. Third, we've talked a lot this evening about transmission. Well, there's the Transmission Infrastructure Loan Program run by DOE's Western Area Power Administration with over $3 billion in unused lending authority for transmission projects. And fourth is DOE's Tribal Loan Program for energy programs with tribal nations. It was actually signed into law by President Trump in 2017 with $2 billion, but no loans have been made to date. Bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is that CETA was a smart idea 10 years ago during the last recession, and it is even smarter today in our COVID and climate-plagued economy. So thanks, and back to you, Bracken.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And in this moment when budgets are going to be tight and there's going to be a big fight over appropriations, looking at these really successful lending authorities is a huge lever. Really can't get enough attention. Pearson, let me turn it over to you. The other side of this, rather than direct lending, is tax-based incentives. I think everybody on this call is going to be very familiar with the production tax credit, the investment tax credit, the struggle to make them refundable potentially, or get them extended or expanded in the recovery. Tell me what's different about the investment tax strategy that you were laying out in your video. It's a broad and technology neutral approach. I'd love to hear more about why you think that's viable and what benefits it can achieve.
Sure. Thanks, Bracken, and a thanks to all my co-authors too, because it was a collective effort. So, I'll start by noting that we focused our proposal on the investment tax credit side of things rather than the production tax credit, because while there's obviously a need to do whatever we can to accelerate the clean energy deployment efforts, it's also, folks here have spoken several times about, maintaining market dynamics and FERC, where we'll be looking at a lot of this stuff, I suspect, in the future. And so it's important to keep competitive markets functioning well and prices reflecting existing market realities. So we focus on investment credits because there are some questions about whether the production tax credit side of things really can achieve that. But that aside, there are probably two fundamental features to the clean energy investment credit that we laid out, and big differences from what we have right now. And that is, one, the tax code is not known for being dynamic in particular, right? So it really needs to be broad enough in scope to be able to accommodate innovation as that innovation occurs, right? And include new technologies as they're developed, right? A lot of technologies, extremely promising, valuable technologies have come to market, since the original list in the tax code was created well over a decade ago, right? You would have expected that. That's what we're hoping for. And they provide critical benefits, right? Emissions reductions, resiliency, reliability, on par with these existing technologies. And so, why wouldn't we want to be able to promote those innovations as they occur, right? And continue doing so in the future as these new ideas come to fruition. So that's the first feature, right, that makes this different. And the second is the focus on avoided carbon emissions, but on a relative basis, right? Because that ensures that as the grid gets cleaner, we're providing incentives to the best performing technologies, cleanest, right, in the class, if you will, rather than propping up those that no longer drive us towards our clean energy carbon reduction goals, right? So again, just building on that theme of dynamism. That's really what makes this different.
Great. Thanks, Pearson. And let me turn now to Vanessa. In your bio, I said you're from Texas, and Texas has clearly been a market leader in creation of clean energy, getting it deployed, opening up free markets, but also using standards. And I'm sort of interested in your deep experience in open and competitive markets in the electricity sector, and how they've driven innovation, but also how that works with the nature of regulated utilities. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, sort of mining the appropriate roles for each party, but how particularly open markets are critical, and market competition is critical for innovation and deployment.
Sure. Thank you, Bracken. And I echo the thanks to the great work of my co-authors on this paper as well. I think Texas, speaking as well to Caitlin's comments on the first panel, is kind of a nice laboratory for innovation. And what we saw with the CREZ process that she mentioned was the ability for good policy to yield positive market outcomes. And so just by example, in Texas, we had a mandate in 2005 to deploy approximately 6,000 megawatts of clean energy, predominantly wind, with the stretch goal of hitting 10,000 megawatts by 2025. Here we are in 2020 with more than 31,000 megawatts installed, several thousand under construction, and even many more thousands of wind, solar, and storage in the interconnection queue. And so essentially what happened was that incentives were established to jumpstart an industry, and then the market took over. Government got out of the way and essentially allowed the private market, and the way the utilities are decoupled from the generation, allowed those investors in the independent power producers, solar developers and wind developers and battery storage developers, to innovate, deploy the capital, and not put that risk on the utilities. And I think that's really the important distinction and one of the recommendations we make in our paper is it's important to allow utilities to focus on really their bread and butter. Their essential focus is on maintaining a resilient and reliable grid, and not disincentivize things like utilizing non-transmission solutions or not disincentivizing a reduction in consumption. And so I think there are opportunities to provide policy direction, but then allow the markets to innovate so that we can push forward toward clean energy and climate goals.
That's great. Well, I think we've just begun to scratch the surface of a very, very rich topic. Really excited to talk about leveraging private capital through smart public policies. And I think we've touched just a really quick once over lightly, and hopefully we've shaved off a couple minutes and are catching up on the timing. So let me hand it back to you, Barbara, and thanks so much to this panel. You've been really good to work with.
Thank you, Bracken. That was expertly moderated and a terrific panel. We're going to turn it over now to our third and final panel, Developing Clean Transport and Low Emissions Infrastructure, which will be moderated by Zoe Elizabeth. Zoe is based in California, leading decarbonization and regional resilience through data, innovation, and partnerships. Zoe, over to you, please.
Good evening, everyone. So thrilled to be here. What a great conversation so far, and honored to get to moderate the capstone panel of the night. This is, again, just like the others, a distinguished and fabulous panel. I'm going to do brief introductions, and then we're just going to jump right into the conversation. And then, just as everyone has said, unless one of my speakers otherwise noted, that everyone is here, including myself, is speaking in their own personal capacity. Natasha has spent over a decade accelerating the transition to decarbonization, both nationally and internationally. She's held roles in both the federal government and nonprofit sectors, and currently serves as VP for research at, I didn't write it down, sorry, Natasha, the Alliance for Clean Energy. And Morgan Putnam has spent over 15 years in the solar industry. He holds a PhD from Caltech, and most importantly, perhaps, is a proud Minnesota native. Kelly Fleming works as a transportation and energy research and policy analyst at UC Davis. She has a PhD in chemical engineering and has previously served as a policy fellow at the Department of Energy. Joel Levine is currently executive director of Plug in America, the national consumer voice for electric vehicles. And finally, Kevin Vincent served as chief counsel to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in the Obama-Biden administration, and is currently advising companies on electric and automated vehicle issues. So absolutely a great group. And we're going to do this a little bit differently in that I'm going to ask the same questions to most of the panelists, so you can kind of hear each of their different views. So I'm going to kick it off with a kind of big picture question, taking a step back a little bit. So transportation emissions are responsible for about 40% of US GHG emissions, sometimes more depending on how you do that calculation. So obviously, we need to get to zero carbon transportation to combat climate change. But what I want to kind of have three of you touch on first is why else? Why else do we need to get to zero carbon transportation? What specific benefits will come from the policies you recommend? How will this benefit everyday Americans? And I'm going to turn it to you, Natasha, to answer that first.
I'm Natasha Vidangos.
Oh,
electrification of transportation is a massive opportunity.
The video can go ahead, sorry. I was so excited to talk to you all that I skipped over that we're going to the video, but you can go ahead and push play.
Some traditional transportation sector questions. I'm Natasha Vidangos. Electrification of transportation is a massive opportunity, but we'll only be able to take full advantage of it if we really do well at building out the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. EV charging infrastructure marries some traditional transportation sector questions with those of the power sector and requires some special considerations, from grid impacts to electricity pricing and the need for new business models to tie the whole thing together. Our group recommended 7 different options to try to reduce barriers to deployment, increase penetration, and scale up. They include options like rebate programs to mitigate upfront costs, establishing a sunshot initiative equivalent for EV infrastructure cost reduction, leading by example and installing charging infrastructure at federal properties, leveraging electric utility spending, advancing vehicle-to-grid integration, and incentivizing the build-out of charging infrastructure where vehicles have long dwell times, for high-mileage drivers, and for medium and heavy-duty vehicles.
Hi, I'm Joel Levin. Our group looked at electrifying light-duty vehicles, which of course would have a number of different important benefits, from strengthening U.S. manufacturing leadership to improvements in public health to, of course, deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. We identified 5 different policy interventions. First was setting a 50% purchase requirement for all federal procurement of light-duty vehicles. This is something that could be done immediately by an executive order. Second is to reform the federal EV tax credit, which was recently adopted by Congress and could be included in any federal stimulus package. Third is establishing a national clean miles standard for fleets and shared ride vehicles. Fourth is creation of a national ZEV mandate. And lastly, establishing a fee-based system to support EVs, which could also include a cash for clunkers program.
I'm Kelly Fleming. Automated vehicles, or AVs, are developing rapidly, and just last month, Google began the first self-driving taxi service in the Phoenix suburbs. While these vehicles have the potential to greatly improve transportation, without any regulations or policies, they could result in increasing emissions, congestion, worse transportation inequities, and uncoordinated safety standards that are bad for business. To make the U.S. a leader in AV technology, we recommend the Biden-Harris administration do the following. First, utilize the Clean Air Act to require manufactured and commercially operated AVs are zero emission and shared. Second, invest heavily in transit bus automation to extend the benefits of AVs to all. Third, increase funding for AV innovation research through the Departments of Energy, Defense, Transportation, and program offices like ARPA-E. Fourth, direct NHTSA to implement enforceable AV safety standards. Fifth, get ahead of the negative labor impacts by assembling an interagency working group and implement a jobs guarantee program. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Morgan Putnam, and I'm here to speak to you about Next-Gen Highways. Next-Gen Highways are a national infrastructure plan that will co-locate the transport of vehicles, energy, and information. Next-Gen Highways will enable rapid decarbonization of the transportation and electric sectors, and they will additionally create hundreds of thousands of new jobs and address environmental justice through the health benefits associated with transportation electrification. As envisioned, Next-Gen Highways will accomplish 3 things. First, they will accomplish a national HVDC transmission grid. This is a supergrid that you heard about earlier tonight. Second, they will proactively strengthen the grid along key transportation corridors to support rapid transportation electrification. And third, they will deploy fiber, 5G, and other advanced communications infrastructure to address the digital divide in rural and urban areas. Thanks so much.
Hello, my name's Kevin Vincent. I'm a member of our team, although not the principal author of our paper, which recommends 7 different policies that can be used by the Biden administration to decarbonize medium and heavy-duty trucks. Most of our recommendations require congressional action and increased appropriations from Congress, and those may not be forthcoming if the Republicans continue to control the Senate in the first couple years of the Biden administration. So we want to focus on the 3 recommendations we have, which can be effectuated by executive orders and regulatory action by the Biden administration. The first of those recommendations is to increase the corporate average fuel economy CAFE standards for medium and heavy duty trucks, and to transition those CAFE standards into a zero emission mandate for medium and heavy duty trucks. And we will talk about that policy and some other recommendations.
All right, thank you all. Thank you for that. Sorry, I was so patient waiting to be the last panel. I've been so anxious to ask these questions. I jumped ahead. So I've already given you that preview. I'm going to state the question just one more time, right? Kind of those videos are just such a great job of getting into the really specific details of these policy recommendations. But we want to kind of just take a step back and talk about really what the benefits. Why are we doing this? So starting with you, Natasha, what specific benefits will your policy recommendations bring to everyday Americans?
Thank you, Zoe. And, you know, this is really about the benefits that come with transportation electrification. And I'd say every day it's becoming clearer that electrification really is the future of transportation. And the Biden campaign has signaled that they really understand this point. And yes, it's really exciting from an emissions reduction standpoint. Based on some reasonable assumptions, you can basically calculate that an electric car produces about half the emissions of a vehicle that runs on gasoline. That's a really strong motivation, but it's also not the only motivation. EVs also cost less to drive, they require less maintenance, they have no tailpipe emissions, and that spells less toxic air pollution that leads to the severe health impacts that range from childhood asthma to premature death in heavily trafficked corridors. Others have mentioned this already, but it's really front and center. I'd also flag that a lot of those impacts to health predominantly happen for people of color and underserved and frontline communities. So it's the right thing to do from a number of different angles. Electrification is also an enormous commercial opportunity for a lot in the US industry as well as US workers. For the last century, the automotive industry has been a really substantial contributor to US GDP. And this is largely derived from the US leadership in the technology as well. Other countries in the world and Europe and China also get this, that if you are the producers of the technology and you're the leaders, that sets you up to be the leader in a global market that's set to grow. So we have competition. So the real question here is, wide-scale electrification is coming, but can we deploy it at scale, and can we get it off quickly enough that we're not left behind?
That's great, thank you. Joel, what can you add to this, answer this question, the why transportation electrification? Unmute so we can hear your brilliance.
Okay, how about now? You can hear me?
Yeah,
so building off of Natasha's comments, I wanted to highlight sort of the economic benefits and also the benefits for drivers. So the economic benefits, I mean, if you ask anybody in the auto industry, they will tell you that electrification is the future, that this is what cars are going to look like in 10 years, 20 years sooner. And so the truth is, as Natasha said, you know, the auto manufacturing has been a central part of the US economy for, you know, a very long time. If we want to be manufacturing cars in 20 years, we need to get into EVs. We need to make a strong national commitment to electric vehicles because Germany is doing it, China is doing it, Korea is doing it. Other countries are making very big investments in these vehicles. And if we don't, we're going to be buying them elsewhere. So there's real economic benefits. And they're spread all over the place. The EV investment is going not just to traditional auto manufacturing states like Michigan, Ohio, but there's many other states now that are seeing EV manufacturing coming in. Tennessee, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, California. So there's real economic development opportunities with manufacturing. Then on the fueling side, so electricity is a much more labor-intense fuel than gasoline, than petroleum. With our petroleum, we import a lot of it. It comes from halfway around the world. Electricity is manufactured locally. It's a domestic fuel, and to build out the electric infrastructure, to build all that renewable energy, to build all those charging stations that we're going to need, it's going to be, you know, thousands and thousands of good paying jobs for electricians and associated different professions. So there's really a lot of opportunity there for economic development. On the other side, let me talk about drivers a little bit, since I represent a drivers association. This is different than most of the other things we've talked about tonight, in that in order for this to happen, people have to make a commitment to buy the vehicles. So it can't just be that it's good for the economy. You have to convince individual consumers that they want to go out and shell out $30,000 or whatever for a new vehicle. This is, one of the biggest investments they're going to make in their life. And so it needs to be compelling for consumers. And in fact, it is. EVs, one of the things no one has mentioned, but EVs are more fun to drive. There's a reason people love their EVs. They have maximum torque from a standstill, and so drivers do in fact love them. Plus, they're cheaper to fuel, they're cheaper to maintain. They have very few moving parts. I mean, at its core, an electric vehicle is basically just a battery, a motor, and a set of wheels. So there's all those hundreds of moving parts in a gas-powered car that you don't have to wear out. So they're easier to maintain and more convenient because you're not always going to your mechanic and you're not always going to the gas station. You wake up in the morning and you're fully charged. So there's a lot of benefits for consumers as well. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. And it's great to hear about that geographic distribution of those benefits. I think that's really important and something that often gets not talked about as much in the conversation. So great points. All right, and Kevin, I'm going to go to you next. How would you kind of describe these question of benefits and the why of transportation electrification?
Sure, I want to follow up a little bit about Joel talking about EVs being fun to drive, focusing on the consumer vehicles, but in the truck segment, in medium and heavy duty trucks and buses, that also applies. Those jobs driving a diesel vehicle all day long and the vibrations of an internal combustion engine, that can be a hard, dirty job. And we have talked to truck drivers who drive the electric truck and the electric buses. And it's a much more pleasant experience for them. It makes the work environment better for people who are driving an electric bus and driving an electric truck. So it's like once you go electric, you don't want to go back. It just makes the work environment that much better. And then it also makes the environment around, and Natasha touched on this, the health impacts, particularly again, looking at the medium and heavy duty truck segment, you have the trucks make up one quarter of the emissions, carbon emissions, but they also make up a huge percentage of the particulate matter and the NOx and other pollutants that are very harmful to public health. And so they have a very negative impact on a local level, and oftentimes that is located in poorest communities and in minority communities where a lot of depots are located. So electrifying medium and heavy duty trucking improves the environment for the workers who are driving, and it also improves the environment of people who have to live and stand around. Just the other day, I was driving down the road. It's a great warm day, with global warming. That's one advantage is you can drive with my windows down, and I pulled behind the diesel fumes behind that bus, and that goes away with electric buses.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And also really great to hear. I think we don't hear as much about the benefits to drivers of, professional drivers of medium heavy duty. That's really great. Okay. Morgan and Kelly, I'm going to ask you to frame this question differently for you all, right? The future forward thinking, really innovation papers that you worked on. The question I'd like to pose to both of you, and Kelly, I'll start with you, is how do the next 50 years of transportation compare to the previous 50 years of transportation?
Thanks, Zoe. So it will depend a lot on what we do now. Transportation's already being revolutionized. We have ride-hailing technologies, electrification. We're sharing vehicles more, both for ride-hailing and car share programs like Car2Go. We even have things called vertical takeoff and landing vehicles that are all electric. So no matter what we do, it's going to change, but the way that it changes is going to depend on what we do now. And currently we're behind on technologies like automated vehicles. We've seen already ride hailing, which has revolutionized the way we get around, is already increasing emissions. It's disproportionately benefiting white, wealthy, and young people. So we need to think about policies that are going to distribute those benefits more equitably and not contribute more to congestion and emissions. And so if driverless vehicles come to market and are broadly deployed, those negative impacts could be amplified, causing more congestion and emissions. It could cause more urban sprawl, causing more equity gaps that we don't have any if we don't have any of those regulations or policies in place. But with the right policies, we could see what we would consider a heaven scenario, where automated vehicles will provide more services to underserved communities that don't currently have access to transit or vehicles, and that could be in the form of micro shuttles or transit. It could reduce overall costs of transportation, and it could reduce emissions if they're all electric, and if we utilize connected technology, which I think Morgan is about to talk about.
Great. Morgan, let's hear from you on this question. The next 50 years look like?
Yeah, so we're at an inflection point. And if you look behind you, you'll see an electric grid that is entirely separated from our transportation system, and a transportation system that has limited interactions with our communications network. And if you could jump forward 10 years, you would enter a world where these networks have been seamlessly merged to enable an electrified future that is filled with a variety of connected and autonomous vehicles. So the first signs of that future are already here. Startups and established automotive manufacturers are investing billions upon billions of dollars in electric, connected, and autonomous vehicles. And oil majors have recast themselves as energy majors, investing billions of dollars in zero-emission vehicle charging infrastructure. And I would argue that over the next 5 years, the countries that figure out how to merge these networks will not only deliver immense local economic benefits, they will build the next Ford, the next Cisco, and the next WSP. So what the Next Gen Highways issue paper does is it touches upon the start of a policy framework for the next 50 years of transportation.
Great. Okay, so more jobs, cleaner air, better working conditions for drivers, less pollution for frontline communities, getting the country ready to become a leader in this future, connecting transportation and electricity, diverse sociodemographic and geographic benefits across the country, really like clearly powerful benefits.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
There,
Jump in, Kevin.
One add, coming from NHTSA with the Safety Administration, we're also talking about a safer future coming from the possibility of AVs. And particularly if we can, with the Biden administration, get a new regulatory framework in place there. So that can be part of the future as well.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So and greater safety, but we have a short timeline to make a big transition, right? I asked about the next 50 years, but we're aiming to get to carbon neutrality over the next 30 years. Transportation intersects with every aspect of our lives on a very daily basis. So this is a big change. Is it possible? Like, can we actually get there? And if so, getting specific, what are the policies, the regulations, the standards, the partnerships, however you want to take this, that are necessary to get there? And this time, Kelly, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. There are a ton of policies that need to be implemented, so I won't go through all of them, obviously. And some areas will be easier than others, but I do want to emphasize that electrification isn't the only thing that we need to do. We also need to be lowering our vehicle miles traveled and investing in active transportation infrastructure. And there are several more panels on this in the following summits next Monday and the Monday after that, so register. So I think light duty will be the easiest. We need to extend and expand the EV tax credit, implement a ZEV mandate, perhaps extend those tax credits so that they're more beneficial to lower income people, and extend it to things like electric bicycles. I'll let other people who are authors on the electrification papers go ahead.
Okay. Next, Morgan, I'm gonna hand it to you then. You know, what do we need to do to get there? And also addressing this question head on, like, is this really possible?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the answer, thankfully, is that it is definitely possible, but we got to get moving. So the West Coast Clean Transit Corridor study called out what I think is really one of the greatest needs, which is to strengthen the grid in key transportation corridors. And in particular, some of the equipment we're going to need to build out, new substations and transmission line extensions, are 5 years to build. So if we need to, if we're going to do this, we got to get started now. And then to that end, from a Next Gen Highways point of view, there's 3 things I'd call out on this call. First, we need to amend the Federal Highway Administration policy to guarantee that transmission, broadband, and 5G infrastructure, if buried, can be located within an interstate right-of-way. Second, we need to enact federal legislation that modifies the Federal Power Act to allow interstate transmission projects with approval in one state to go to FERC for approval in remaining states. And then third, we need federal legislation that creates a program to plan, construct, and operate next-gen highways. So essentially highways that consider the co-location of energy, the co-location of information, and the co-location of vehicles within the existing highway right-of-ways. And that should be done in coordination with the relevant federal agencies, but also with industry partners.
Great, thank you. All right, Kevin, I'm going to turn that same question to you. You've got deep administrative experience, so we want your real world experience on, is this possible, and what are the key policies to get us there?
I think the key policy to get us there is going to be the national ZEV mandate. I think Joel may talk about the ZEV mandate on the light duty side. I want to stress that the ZEV mandate is a policy tool that can be used for medium and heavy duty trucks. In fact, there's 15 states that are following California now and have agreed to a compact to move forward to mandate the sale of increasing percentage of zero emission trucks and buses. And that is probably the most powerful tool. But again, it can be done at the national level, and also you need to enable it at the state level because the states are already moving forward. And I think you want to do both policy levers.
Great.
There's
Natasha.
I'd like somebody to go.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to go to Natasha, and then I'll go to Joel to wrap up this question.
Perfect. On the infrastructure side, obviously building EV charging infrastructure is a challenge. There are lots of policies that can help us get there. We need them all. I will flag that I think a lot of folks may not realize how far we've already come on this point. Back in 2009, there were 500 charging stations in the United States. Today, there's just shy of 30,000. 11 years. That's roughly the turnover. The average turnover of vehicles is 11 years. And we took that long to get to 30,000 charging stations. So while very often our conversation starts to wrap around the question of, is this a chicken and an egg problem? How can you get the chargers out there? If the vehicles aren't there, how can you get the vehicles if there aren't the chargers? We're swiftly moving beyond that. We're getting to the point where we really just need to start talking about scaling up and doing it as efficiently, effectively, and quickly as we can, and make sure we have all three of those. So in our paper, I'll save the details largely for the paper because I see that we're running out of time. But the main goals were to increase penetration, to remove barriers, and to scale up. So find ways to make it easier, find ways to make it faster, make sure we get as many chargers everywhere we can get them as possible, and try to really juice the market so that we can get it to go quickly.
Great, thank you, Natasha. So Joel, I think this is going to be our last response of the evening. So I'm actually going to make this final question a little bit harder for you, which is, so how do we get there? But particularly, how do we get there in what will very likely be a divided government? You can give us specific policies or tell us why this should be considered a bipartisan issue, not just a Democratic issue.
Yeah, sure. So I've actually spent a fair bit of time walking around Capitol Hill and talking to people about EVs on both sides of the aisle. And what I have found is that it's not a partisan issue. There are things, because we've talked so much about why there's so many different benefits to EVs. And what I found is that when you're speaking to different people from different states with different concerns, there's something about EVs that resonates for practically everybody of any political persuasion. And you need to find the right messaging for what speaks to different people. So for some folks, it's about climate change. For some people, it's about local air quality or public health. So if you're talking to representatives from cities that have, bad air pollution and kids going to school with inhalers, it's a public health issue. if you are talking to traditional auto manufacturing states, Michigan, Ohio, it's about preserving those jobs and preserving those industries. And, do you want to be manufacturing cars in the next 20 years? Means you need to move on to the next big technological leap in the automotive world. Then there are other states that are eagerly looking to build a high-tech economy. And I threw out some examples before, but states that are now, getting a lot of investment in EV manufacturing: Georgia, Tennessee, Arizona, California, some others. So this is an opportunity for them to really jump up their economies and get into this high-tech sector. For others, it's a consumer benefit of doing something that consumers like and really want. For people that are concerned about domestic energy production, again, this is a vehicle that only runs on American energy. So how about that? So if you look at states that are heavily invested in wind production, Texas, Iowa, Kansas, this is an opportunity to build out that infrastructure and have a demand for that power. So I think this is not a partisan issue. There's something in this for everybody, and you just need to find the language that works for different folks.
Great, thank you. What a great way to end this. A high note of seeing in these times that feel so divided, that really this transportation electrification can be an opportunity to bridge, so many gaps and create such a wealth of benefits. I'm going to encourage everybody who's out there listening that we have to really delve into these policy papers, the issues of transportation. These are rich, really expert-driven written policy papers. So if you want to hear more, I really recommend you to delve in there. Thank you, panel, for such a great short discussion, but it was really, really engaging. I appreciate your time. And I don't know, we did it, this great presentation, no technical glitches, on wrapping up on time. So that says something pretty amazing. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Zoe. You did come in on time. Thank you all very much. That was an inspiring vision of the future and a great way to conclude Summit 1. I'd like to also thank everybody who's attending for joining us. As Nicole said at the outset, we hope to see you next Monday at 7 o'clock Eastern for session 2 on equity. Equity is an essential pillar to secure environmental justice and to create equitable economic opportunity for low-income communities and communities of color. So again, that's November 23rd at 7. And then our final session, Policy Summit number 3, will be on innovation. And that is scheduled for November 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern as well. It will examine RD&D as well as U.S. global competitiveness. Please join me in thanking all of the paper authors and everyone else involved tonight for their hard work and vital contributions to this discussion. Good evening, and thank you all again for joining us.